Every episode celebrates original content written by real people who experience real emotions. I'm Rayanne Thorn Krueger. Welcome to Real Words. Here we are. I'm going to jump right in. My guest today is Cory Reeder. I've known Cory for a long time.
Yeah,
And he's been a guest before on HR Latte when we talked about his filmmaking, in particular, a disability project that he did for, I think it was Easter Seals. Is that correct?
it was. Yeah,
Did I
the
have that
Easter
right?
Seals Disability Film Challenge. They just wrapped up their 11th year of doing that, and they're going to be announcing their nominees here in the next week or so.
Oh, that's very exciting. And I'm sure you contributed again.
I did, but with all the other things that are going on in my creative life, I did not take on any of the directing or producing reins. This year, I wrote a screenplay for a writer who I met on the WGA picket last year on the picket lines. I
Oh,
went out there in
wow.
solidarity, and I met Katie Farmer, and she never participated in the Disability Film Challenge. So she hit me up this year and said, I sure would like to direct. And I said, well, I'll help you produce a little bit, but mostly I'm happy to use all my experience of the years to write you a screenplay that you can go out there and direct. And so that's what I did. And I came on set and I helped her out a little bit in her directing debut. And it's got a great reception, as they always do. There's always so many fun films that you can watch that are made annually as part of the Disability Film Challenge. Like anybody that wants to watch, just look it up on YouTube or Facebook, disabilityfilmchallenge.com, I believe it is. And I think this year there was maybe like 130 films that were made from around the world.
Wow. Wow, that is incredible. What a worthy cause. Thank you for continuing to participate in
Oh, yeah.
that. So I met you as a playwright and as an actor. I was dabbling a little bit at a small independent theater in Fullerton, California, and you popped on the scene, well, had been on the scene long before but you were around and about doing films, writing screenplays, playwriting. Why don't you give us a background of your history coming to this place where you are now and becoming an author?
Oh, for sure. Um, well, I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, latchkey kid, but I had a middle class upbringing, so the latches weren't too there weren't too many latches on the door. And but predominantly, I was always entertained by film and television. That was my thing. It wasn't until right before the pandemic that I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. I knew I was dyslexic from a young age, but just before the pandemic, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and so it just brought so many things into light about how I didn't have sort of the patience or wherewithal to sit down and be an avid reader. My sister Judy really loved reading, but I just always went for the TV remote, or I'd be outside running around. Um, so with that, it kind of felt like a natural progression for me to get into wanting to produce these things that I was watching on TV or at the movie theaters. And I picked up my dad's Super 8 camera, started making movies. I would do it sort of with inspiration, without a screenplay. I just thought, like, we make it up as we go, sort of like imaginary playing when you're with your friends at any time at like 8 or 10 or 12 years old. Eventually in high school, my art teacher, Mr. Stanton, introduced me to like proper cinema. He had this collection in his office at school of probably, I don't know, 300 or 500 VHS cassette
Wow.
tapes that he would go in. I would have a free period with him, and he'd say, pick a movie and watch it. And so I really started getting exposed to other things other than just American movies or American movies, but art house films. That's how I was first introduced to David Lynch.
Right.
And then as things continued to go on, and I wound up going to Cal State Fullerton, I got into their film and television program, and I started realizing, oh, you just don't make things up as you go along. It's a lot easier if you have a blueprint, if you have a screenplay. So that kind of introduced me into writing. And
Right.
then that continued on, and eventually I wound up creating my film production company, Renaissance Man Productions, where we did a long time in the early years of the Warp Tour. It didn't have anything to do with cinema per se, but I would uh, go out and film rock bands that were getting ready to go on the Warp Tour, and I would edit those, direct those, produce those, and then send them out on the road with 5,000 DVDs for them to sell.
Wow.
Eventually, that grew tiring, so I moved to Hollywood to finally break big. And after years, almost a decade of experience in production under my belt down in Orange County, I landed in LA and realized I knew nobody and nothing. And I started over again as a production assistant and worked my way up again, and got even more into writing, really got into the craft of screenwriting, and stakes and escalations and character development,
Right.
and all of these sorts of things that make a good story. And then you get to weave in like themes, and hopefully there's a plot. uh, all these sorts of basic story things that I always took for granted, because it's like my life is a story, life is filled with plot and themes, and you just cram them in there and it'll be good, right? Well,
Right.
it turns out not right, because there's a lot of crappy movies and crappy TV shows and crappy books, but
How do
you
they
know,
get made, right? How
how
do
did they
they
get
get
made?
made?
There's a bunch of theories behind that, but I'm sure the most popular one to harp on is nepotism.
Sure.
Anyway, I didn't have
Well,
any of those things, so I just keep on plugging along, and eventually, it came to this point to where we could talk about this in a bit, but where I
yeah.
turned to bigger literary works, and I started writing my first book.
How humbling that must have been for you having the experience that you did to realize I I need more experience and I need more connections. And I can't imagine that the starting over when you feel like you've accomplished everything, right? I'm going to move to Hollywood because I've accomplished what I need to do in order to be successful there.
Yeah.
Tell us how did you manage that, the humbling side of that? How did you I mean, I probably would have gone into a funk and had to pull myself out of it after so many people pounding on my door. So how did you
Yeah.
do it?
Well, I mean, truth be told, in more of a sort of existential like perspective, that funk, that starting over happens anytime any creative person finishes a project. So it could be a film, it could be a short story, it could be a poem, but we're always back to square one. All we have to take with us now is maybe a little bit more experience, a little bit, we've made some mistakes maybe that we've learned from, and maybe luckily within a shorter amount of time we'll find new inspiration so we can continue forward. But that's sort of just what happened to me. It was a tremendous aha moment when I first moved to LA and went. I'll never forget the day. Like I woke up that morning, walked down to Starbucks and ordered coffee, and there were three people at tables that had like Final Draft open. They were all writing screenplays. The woman in front of me, I could tell, was taking an order. She was like an assistant for someone at CAA or UTA or something, some agency in the industry, and she's taking their coffee orders. And like everybody around me is dressed up like suits, getting ready to go into the office. And I'm just like, 15 years. You guys didn't notice me in Fullerton, California? But here I am in the heart of West Hollywood, surrounded by the business. And they're like, dude, we can't look past Wilshire. And you want us to get on the 10 freeway to the 5 and go down to Fullerton? That's not going to happen, buddy. So it was a bitter pill to swallow, but it eventually went down, and that's where I just decided, you just keep on learning. And that too is another thing, just sort of like the creative experience of, birth and death, the cycle of
Right.
life, whatever it is with each project that you have, the whole world that we live in, the aesthetic of the things that we create are consistently going to be um, judged by the world that we're living in. And we're living in a world right now today that is going through a tremendous awakening of um, the realities of the world, of the need for diversity and inclusiveness, and it's also being bombarded with terrible atrocities in humanity and in the news. And so there's this balance that we need, that will always be reconciled, I think, first through the artists. Because when the artists start speaking up, when they start writing the songs, when they start writing the books, the movies start playing in theaters, and the whole sort of social consciousness begins to change, then the capitalists will take over and they'll figure out how to make money on all of us, and
Right.
you know not give us
Right.
our fair share, but all of a
Well,
sudden.
they've already, I mean, we'll get into this, but they've already decided that some of us are dispensable, right?
Oh,
That
100%. And they've
right.
kind of always been that way.
True.
There's
True.
always been marginalized creatives and people that have been tucked into the background.
I think that the bulk of creators now are starting to feel that pinch
Yeah.
and the hurt that comes from it, from feeling like you're being pushed into a corner of irrelevancy because of technology and so forth. And we'll get into that. But before we do, my guest today is Cory Reeder. He is the head of Renaissance Man Productions, or RMP, screenwriter, playwright, and now novelist. So let's dive in there. You mentioned earlier that you decided to dive in deeper to what this whole creative process of writing is, and it sounds like the novel was the next step for you. Tell us about that. What was it like when you made that decision, and what was the impetus to do this?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I went through some, without putting out spoilers or whatever, but I'll truncate to say, like, I went through some very traumatic things when I was a kid, through my family. You know, my sister was killed. Uh, Judy, who I mentioned earlier, she was killed, and then my mother went into a depression, and that wound up reigniting some cancer. So by 16, I had lost my matriarch and my sister, who was just beloved to me. And so this sort of sent me on this wild spiral of life where I'm trying to manage in all sorts of, let's just say, less than healthy ways. As an early teenager, that went into my 20s and 30s as well. And through all of this, I would have family members that would just be like, you just have had the craziest life. Like, you really should write a book about it. And I would be like, yeah, 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 whatever. I don't read. I don't write. I don't write books for sure. So thanks, but no thanks. And something happened that, long story short, the guy that killed my sister wound up coming up for parole. And I had this idea as this was happening in 2019. I was like, I'm going to write a movie about this. By then, I had taken some great screenwriting classes and talked about all the things I talked about before about just creating good story arcs. And I thought, this could be fairly easy to do because I've lived it. I know enough about genre where I can kind of put some fun twists and turns in there. Because it's a movie, I can have a little bit of creative license, especially because it's my life. So I started writing this thing, and I wrote all the way up to the third act. And I said, the third act is going to stop right before I go see this guy for a parole hearing. And then I'm going to live it, and then I'm going to write it. And so that happened, and I lived it. And I was sitting in my hotel room the next day, and I was absolutely just dumbfounded. I sat in front of my computer, and I just couldn't write. It wasn't writer's block. It was an overwhelming, just a dearth of feelings, and my entire consciousness and life had just exploded because from facing one of the biggest fears in my life, I had just like an instantaneous growth spurt of mind, body, and spirit.
Wow.
And so I got on the phone because I was like, I wanted to finish the screenplay. I gave myself a couple days up here, like in this hotel room. I'm like, I should just be able to hammer it out. And I called people and called people, and finally I got my friend Maury on the phone, and he said, "Wow, man, that sounds like you really went through a lot. It sounds like a book." And I said, "But Maury, I don't write books." And he goes, "Have you always written screenplays?" And I said, "No." He's like, "How'd you learn to do that?" And I was like, "I took classes and I just started writing them, and I wrote some crappy ones and then I wrote some good ones." And he's like, "Do you think you could do that with a book?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I can probably do that with a book." And so that's what I started doing. And so that was October of 2019 to the day, 4 years later, October of last year, I finished my first draft. And so
Wow.
it's been absolutely cathartic, incredibly, just the biggest deep dive into my soul. And it's just I'm truly a changed man for having written it.
Wow.
The sort of the inspiration, the thing that kept me going through 4 years, um, was I would share pages with friends and family, and especially people that knew my sister and knew my mom. And they just kept on like patting me on the back and just saying, my God, they'd be like, you are a fantastic writer. Like, this is going to be an amazing book. Like, please don't stop. I need to read what you write next. And so that let me know, just that little bit that you need as a creative, that let me know like, hey, you're good at this. Like, keep it up. This is going to benefit somebody. And so that's what I did. And I shared it when it was first done. I shared it with a copywriter friend, and she went through and took out all of my egregious Oxford commas and found
Dang
a
it.
bunch
I
of
love the
places.
Oxford comma.
Trust me, there's plenty in there. I
Oh,
do
okay,
too.
good, good, good.
Um, but I use the Oxford comma more of a theatrical way of like, this is the
Same,
break, this is the breath,
same.
this is like, let's just
Stop and think.
put a beat,
Stop and
you
think.
know.
Yeah, I need a beat in
Um,
there.
but sometimes too many of those are unnecessary.
Yeah.
So I respected her opinion on those. And after that, I went to a new level. So I've obviously never written anything literary, and like I said before, I'm not the most well-read person. Um, so then friends of mine and I joined a couple writers groups. They said, you need to get this to a developmental editor. They know about publishing. They know what publishers are going to look for this. And so I sought that out. I got on a couple of different websites and found different developmental editors. I queried them. I interviewed them, had Zoom conversations with them. I looked at their prices. I looked at my budget and found someone who worked great for me and was interested in my work. And just about 3 weeks ago, I got all of her notes back and had a fantastic conversation. So now I'm going through and editing that. Um, so
Wow.
yeah, it's
It's a much bigger process than I think people realize.
oh,
They're
100%.
right. It's so much bigger. I want to address something that you said in the beginning when we first started talking about this. Judy is your sister's name? Is
Hmm.
that correct?
Yeah.
Many writers that I've spoken with this project and beyond have cited pain or fear as motivators to produce or create. You experienced trauma. I mean, severe trauma and pain and heartache. Do you believe that for art, good writing to emerge, that we have to suffer? Do artists, writers have to have some kind of suffering or connection, that human connection, in order to really produce good work?
No, I think each artist creates from their own place. Um, I don't think we need pain. I don't think we need fear. But I do think the world shoves that down our throats like we're geese being
Yes.
fattened to turn into foie gras. Um, so it's unfortunately, I think it's unavoidable. But I know that there are plenty of artists and creatives that are out there that create from absolute joy and pleasure and fun. You know, um, that's not to say that they don't face adversity. There's not someone doesn't come in and wrangle their budget when they're trying to create a new ride at Disneyland that is purely meant to bring joy, you know, um, or someone doesn't move up your deadline when you're trying to edit your movie, and all of a sudden they say, "Hey, guess what? It's not Thanksgiving; it's 4th of July now. Get to work." Um, those sorts of things happen, but I know all I can speak for is myself, and for me, there's moments that I put in my book that I would stop and I'd pull the reader aside and just say, I'm wrecked right now. I'm absolutely bawling as I type this. It is so painful for me to remember all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then later on, I just explode with enthusiasm. I'm so glad I'm doing this.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that I get to like set out all of the thumbtacks and broken Legos that I stepped on through life to now be able to turn and say like, but look what it's made. It's made
Right.
me.
Right.
And I'm joyous. I'm happy. I'm free from fear. I am free from that pain. I have a friend of mine, we talk about this a lot. And that's not to say that I don't get afraid. And that's not to say that I don't experience pain. I was going for a walk down the beach the other day and this song came on and it reminded me of my sister and my childhood. And it was just such a beautiful song by this band Dawes. And I started weeping. And yes, that's sadness. Yes, that's, you know, maybe remnants of pain from the past, but I guarantee you with that is a equal share of enthusiasm and joy and gratitude for the fact that I was walking on this amazing beach during this. It was a sunny day out, and the clouds were big, poofy Simpsons clouds in the sky. Santa Monica was in the background with the Ferris wheel. You know, people are walking their dogs, and the dogs are having a crazy fun time. Like, it's amazing that I get to I can look at that past and appreciate where I am now. And I think every artist has that moment too. Painting, picture, film, book, where you look back, and we're always going to look back and be like, oh, there's a lot of mistakes in that, but God, that was so much fun to make, or so cool, or I met that one person that read it and they said this, whatever it is. But I think a blanket statement of saying is pain and fear necessary? I don't think so.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Yeah.
think throughout your narrative, you gave advice to new writers. But if there is any one snippet of advice that you could give to somebody that is a new writer or thinking like you thought 5 years ago, hey, 4 years ago now, 4.5 years ago, what's next? I want to do this, but it's hard. What do I need to do? What do I need to think of?
Um, First, take small bites. Sit down for 10 minutes a day. I'm sure someone on your podcast has said this before.
No, this
Oh,
is
really?
great. Yeah,
Okay.
this is great.
I have a friend of mine, she's trying to write her first screenplay. And I say, just sit down for 10 minutes. That's what I would do. If I would say okay, Cory, I'm going to set aside an hour and go talk about my dead sister, I'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
I'd rather go pay my taxes right now, But if I say hey, sit down for 10 minutes, I can sit down for 10 minutes. I have no excuses for 10 minutes. So I would sit down for 10 minutes. And I think twice in 4 years, I sat there, stared at Microsoft Word, looked at the cursor blinking back at me, and then it was just like, not today. 10 minutes went up and I got up and I just did whatever I wanted to do with the rest of my day. But that's 2 days out of however many else that I spent. And generally I would give an hour. And there were some days that I gave 3 hours. And there were a few where 6 hours in, it was like my head, like an ostrich, just like thunk. And I'd be like, oh my God, 6 hours, a chapter and a half. Crazy. Just because I sat down for 10 minutes. So that's a big one. Go easy on yourself. I thought after I hung up the phone from Maury and he said, write a book. And I said, screw it. I guess this is what's going to happen. I was like, you know what? I've lived this life. I know everything that happened. I have clear memories because it's one of those things where when trauma happens, it sears, or at least it did for me. It seared into my mind. And, I didn't try to erase it with false memories or disillusionment. I tried other things. I tried plenty of drugs and alcohol, but unfortunately that didn't erase all of those things. So I had pretty clear memories of most of it. So I'm like, oh, I could write this in a year. Having never written a book before, I'm like, I could do this in a year. And that year came and I had 4.5 chapters done. And I was like, I better reevaluate. And I did. And once I did that, I said, this is going to take as long as it takes. I will do my best to be diligent and write every day. I will be honest. There were times where 2 weeks would go by and I wouldn't face the page. And because I wouldn't give myself that 10 minutes. And, but I also didn't beat myself up for it. And I didn't beat myself up for it eventually. I did the first few times and I realized that's futile too. I would never tell you if Rayanne, if you're like, hey, I'm having trouble, I haven't written in 2 weeks, I wouldn't be like, Rayanne, you're an idiot. Right, what's your problem? So if I wouldn't say that to you, why would I say that to me? So be nice to yourself. And lastly, uh, don't take it so seriously. You know, people aren't out to get you. Share your work. Share your work with people that want to read it. Um, and you can do it like I did in little bites, because I thought that that would be more consumable than saying like, hey, here's 300 pages. You know, let me know what you think.
That's a lot.
Um,
That's a lot.
yeah. So share it, get people's feedback, and realize if they give you feedback on your story, your writing, your words, it's not feedback on you as a person. You're you're just fine. You're great. You're just learning how to become a better writer. And that's everybody all the time. We're all learning how to be better writers, better humans, better drivers, better golfers, better
Right.
chefs, whatever you're trying to be better at. So failure is important to become better at that.
I love that. Thank you. One of the purposes of this movement, I'll call it, or my idea, my big idea for Real Words, is to celebrate original content and original creations, whether you're an artist, a musician, screenwriter, new novelist, is to celebrate that original work, right? And today, in the last year, we've been talking about it for a while, but in the last year, the speed of acceleration for, I guess, 2 years now, for AI, artificial intelligence tools to be
Mhm.
dropped in our lap and utilized, that acceleration has just picked up faster,
Totally.
faster, faster, faster. And everything that we do online, it feels like there is a little gear shift, or a little gear wheel or a hamburger menu where you can drop down and say create using I don't want to hate AI, but I also, and I don't necessarily fear it, but I am concerned about the loss of creativity for future generations, right? As this becomes easier to create content, not real content, but to create content by pushing a button,
Yeah.
giving a prompt and pushing a button, uh, typing in a prompt to create an image,
Yeah.
pieces of film together, or create a film out of
An
nothing.
entire feature film was made with AI like last week.
Ah! I feel like that emoji with the
The head
explosion at the
exploding.
top of the head. So, and it's really, it's not anger. It's just I'm concerned about future creativity.
Yeah.
Do you have that same concern, or can you put my mind at ease?
Yes and no.
Okay.
um, First of all, corporations, businesses that are in the business to make money. It doesn't matter if you make taco shells or studio pictures. Will always make choices based upon how can they do things quick, fast, and easy and cheap. So they will utilize these things. We as the creators have no power over them.
Right.
Unless we figure out how to use those same tools against them, because then they will regulate it. But until then, as we're seeing now, there's been stories with A24 and Netflix who have been creating images for their movies that are out right now where they use AI to generate those. Um, and they seem to be fairly flippant about it. They don't care. So we can't do anything about that. But I will give you this: technology and progress has always been the concern of the artist. But think about something like Pro Tools. Pro Tools is an audio recording software. And I'll bet you there were a lot of recording studios, recording engineers, all the people that take to run a studio. I'll bet they got really worried when they said, wait a minute, you can put this in somebody's computer and they can take this home? What about my
What about my work?
$150,000 console that I have? What about this building that I soundproofed in these rooms that have all the funky walls so they don't have the echoes? So when you hit the drum, it sounds crisp and clear. They all freaked out, as they rightly should.
As they should have.
But it also sprung up someone like Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas, who could take this software in the bedroom of their parents' home where they both lived and just goof around and come out with probably whatever generation this is, Z,
Z.
W, whatever. I just know it ain't Gen X. Um, millennials, whatever they are, it come out with like a killer Sonic album. And it gave freedom to other musicians that can afford those big studios to then do recording demos and stuff at home. And then they still go to the big studio because those big studios, they have the really good microphones, or they got the really good drum set, or you like the sound of that $150,000 sound mixing board.
Right.
Whatever it is, they have those things. So it enables the artists. The last thing that I'll say about it is, to me, and I really learned this writing this book, the creative process is infinitely more important than the outcome. There is no greater joy that I will get from having written this book that any paycheck, any compliment, any number of books sold, or any amount of money I make for any big publisher anywhere that will ever override how much happiness that brought me to write this. I have a friend of mine, his name is Joey Feldman. He's a painter. And he studied under Ralph Steadman, who did all of the artwork for Hunter S. Thompson. So there's a very splattery, frenetic energy to his work. And he'll do these videos on Instagram and stuff where he's just flinging paint and getting in there and grinding the brush into the canvas and all colors and weird monsters and people and just figured. It's really cool. It's really fun. Someone can go out and buy one of his paintings for $5,000 and be like, this is a really cool painting. But the coolest part about it is how much fun I'm sure Joey had making it. And you can't buy that. So no one can buy the lessons that I learned, the growth that I feel, the amount of integrity that I've gotten from actually putting pen to paper or finger to keys and writing that book. Nothing can take away the experience of the people that I get to work with on a film set, the other creative actors, wardrobe designers, cinematographers, stunt people, screenwriters, everybody, down to the craft service, to the production assistant. That little family, and we experienced this when we were doing theater when we first met. That little family unit that's created is can be so much fun.
That's
and
so true.
you don't get that. So if you keep that mindset, if you keep that as your golden carrot and not the paycheck, you can never be a failed artist. No technology can take that from you.
We've gone over a little bit. I hope you have a couple more minutes because I still have a couple questions for you. First, thank you for your response regarding the AI question, but you do know that your description almost perfectly matched Terminator, right? Turn the machines against the machines themselves.
Yeah.
So use it against them. I love that. It's a great way to think about it, and I appreciate the passion that you feel about this and the others that you have talked to about it. I think that's what I'm gaining from this is it puts to rest my feelings, my fears, my concerns by talking to others and gaining more perspective, not just living in my little shell and saying it's going to take my job, it's going to ruin me, it's going to take away my creativity, when really it allows you a further expansion. Your description of what Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas did, it's perfect. It's perfect. And now she's an Oscar winner twice.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
right? So amazing. What's next for you?
Got editing my book, and then I get to learn about the world of publishing. I've got a query. I've got to find an agent that'll go out and promote the book to publishers. I got to hopefully find a publisher. I hope that it's publisher worthy. But if it's not, like I said, that's okay. I did this thing right before Christmas, is I took my rough draft of the book And I went and I made a limited number of copies. And I sent those out for Christmas to my dad, to all of my friends that are in my book, and anybody, my writing mentor, Jill Sherry, she got a copy of it. And just to say, like, however imperfect this is, because this was before I gave it to my developmental editor, whatever it is, I just want you to know this is 100% Cory right now, and I could not have done this if it wasn't for you. And I got to give it to them, and that, I'm done. But there is the business now, and there is a business of that, and I do think that there is a market, and I do think people will like to read this, and I really tried to put something in there that's just like, look, my story is my story, but the lessons that I learned about myself and how I view the world and how I interact with it, those are universal. So read the book, take my story out and plug your story in.
Hmm.
And I think that the same opportunities can come for you that can come from me. Understanding that none of it's easy. It's often painful. Sometimes there's tears and snot, but in the end, you wake up the next day and it's a brand new day. And we can do it, and we can do it better. So that's the book thing is next for me. I've got a couple screenplays that I'm working on that I'm looking, trying to drum up some money to get those produced. And I've got another screenplay that I'm writing. So yeah, I'm
Never stops. Never
never
stops.
stop.
I love your bit of advice, and I think there were 3 parts of it, but just 10 minutes. Just give it 10 minutes.
Hmm.
So thank you for that. My guest today has been the Cory Reeder, filmmaker. I think that came first, right? Making films as a little kid,
Filmmaking, producing,
filmmaking,
writing, directing,
and
author.
now novelist. We can add author to the title. Thanks again, Cory. Really appreciate you hopping on Real Words with me. And I hope that when your book is published and out there in bookstores and on Amazon, you'll come back and we can talk about that process, and we can share title. I don't even know if you have a title yet, but we'll share title then, and really celebrate this grand achievement. Congratulations.
Awesome. Thanks, Rayanne. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was made possible by Never Enough Media.